Cool. Okay. Anybody have a solution they would like to share to the, which one should we start with? Let's do the separator one. Does anybody have a solution to the join, is what join.js?
Yeah, we had one.
We almost
Sure.
did. We got it down to the commas being removed.
Yeah. The trailing separator is the tough part.
Yeah.
Okay, Mario, go ahead and let's see what you got.
All right. So we came up with two solutions. The first one is the one that's actually comment out here. I can just walk you through it. So we created a function that takes in the array and then the separator, and we defaulted it to be the comma. If nothing gets passed in. Then we created a string here that we're going to be concatenating, and then eventually we're going to return it down there. But like I said, it's two solutions, so I changed it up. But the first time here, so we're going to loop through the actual array, right? And then we're going to concatenate the string. So we're going to take the array at I, and then we're just going to add the separator, which should be the comma here. And for this solution here, we didn't clarify it. So the way we went about it is we sliced. So we started at the 0, and then it's going to go all the way to the end, which will then remove the last comma. This was the second solution. The first one was just this here. So it'll look like that. So we're just gonna, instead of looping, I mean, it's still gonna loop through the whole array, but we're gonna stop at the very last bit. So it's never gonna get into this one here if we eventually get to the last index.
Cool.
So it's never gonna have the separator.
Right.
Yeah, like the separator in the top, line 31 would not be there for this one.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's probably a little confused because they got multiple solutions, but yeah.
I like it. Yeah, I like the slice solution, and I like the conditional. I mean, I think, 6 1/2 dozen the other. Slice is technically doing something behind the scenes. So probably the first solution with the nested, or not the nested, but the if condition inside the for loop is probably the better one for our purposes. But yeah, I mean, that's good. I like it. That was a tough, getting it to not put the separator on the end was the hard part. So good job. I like it. Any questions about the solution? About how it works?
Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah, nice. Did anybody have a different
One question?
I think we just missed the -1 on ours.
Other than the separators, wouldn't it just be easy to just do a concat and just put in the strings you want to, or the arrays you want to put together?
Yes. So there are JavaScript methods that will do this much in an easier fashion, but the idea is to not use, to write our own algorithm. Because if you in an interview you say, oh, I just use this built-in method, they're going to say, okay, that's cool, but how would you do it if you had to implement it, right? So we want to practice with doing the sort of thing that they're doing. Yeah. Cool. All right. Anybody have a different solution they want to share? Okay. I don't want to beat a dead horse here. So does anybody have a solution to the second one, the book index?
I'm so close to the solution, and I think I just figured out where the flaw in my logic is. So
Really?
I don't. Yeah, I think I did.
Okay, let's see what you got.
It's not, so I haven't fixed it yet, but I can tell you where I'm showing it to you if that's what you want.
Well, does anybody have a complete solution?
We have a fixed one.
Okay, cool. Let's see what you got. And then James, you may be able to see where you need to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk us through what you got.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
All right, so let me just put everything back to how it was. Okay. So the way we ended up doing this was we wrote a new variable and we just made a new array. And then what we did was we created a for loop afterwards. And what we wanted to know, first, let me start off by saying that all of this up here, this is mainly just so that if the numbers were succeeding each other, it would combine them all together, so that you get, like in this expected example, 13 through 15 instead of 13, 14, 15.
Okay.
So in our for loop, we did an if statement saying if the index plus one, if the index of the array plus one is equal to the index plus one inside of the array, meaning if we use for the first index, for example, and we get 13 plus one is 14. If that is equal to the index plus one, so now 2, we go up to the second index and that's 14. We create a new variable called beginning. That's where the beginning of our combination of numbers is going to sit. And then while that same statement is true, you're adding another number to the index, an additional 1 to the index, and then you cycle back through the if statement just to check if it's still true. If it's not true, you move on to your next variable, and then it's going to provide an end for that consecutive range.
Okay.
So that's how you would get your 13 through 15 and your 37 through 38.
Okay.
If none of those conditions are met, you go to your else, and then it'll just push inside of that new array whatever the index is. So that's how you get the rest of your numbers. So that's how you get your 1 and so on and so forth. And then we created another variable, new string, and that's just equal to the new array. And then we use a dot join method to change the array into a string. And then we just return the new string. And that's how we ended up
Okay.
going about everything.
And it works nice.
Sorry, the other part is still blocked off, but yes, it would be this one right here.
Nice. That is very good solution. I like it. Any questions before I add my 2 cents? Does it make sense to everyone?
Can I see the T chart? No, I'm just kidding.
Whoops, just dropped my mouse. I did drop my mouse. Yeah, the T chart, right? So this is fine. What immediately jumps in my mind is so here, instead of making an array, right, you could do your list right here. Right, so instead of making an array as your variable, you could make this a list to begin with, and then wherever you push, you could just append it to the end of the array. That way, you just reduce one step, right? So instead of making an array and then creating a string out of it at the end, you could eliminate line 32 and just have your string going all the way through. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So this solution is fine at this point, but what we want to try to avoid in the future is what we have here is like a nested loop, right? So we have a for loop here, and then for every iteration of the for loop, we have a while loop, right? So this is, I'm going to sort of introduce big O notation gently because it's a difficult thing to understand. But when we have nested for loops, what we call the big O, or the efficiency of the algorithm, tends to drop off, right? So it's not as efficient to have a for loop within a for loop or a loop within a loop. Okay, so because every time the outer loop runs, the inner loop runs, and the number of operations that actually has to happen as the algorithm runs goes up exponentially. So we want to try to avoid this. I mean, sometimes we just have to do it, right? Sometimes it's the only solution to a problem. But this is not ideal, right? We want to try to avoid nesting loops within inside of loops. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that?
Will you show us how you would have did it?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Let me.
Tyler, if you want, I cracked mine. If I can show that, it's not the same as this one.
Yeah, let's see what you got.
All right, are we all looking at code?
All I see is says James Benora has
I see a
started the
black
trade.
screen.
Yeah, just a blank. There we go. There it is.
Cool. So I started off declaring 3 variables, first, mid, and last. First is to hold the first number in one of these ranges. Mid is kind of just a placeholder. I could probably get rid of it, but it made the code easier to follow. And last is to take the last of a range. We start with the for loop iterating through the array, and then it checks to see if the current index, if the current position in the array +1 is equal to the next position in the array. If it is, it checks to see if first is equal to 0. If first is equal to 0, then that number becomes first. The console logs are in there because I was trying to debug the code. If first is not equal to 0, that means we already have a first in range. So it's going to check if this is a mid. Then we'll get to give it a mid. And if it's not a mid, it does nothing. And then it says, so if this is not true, then it checks to see if the previous number before it is equal to the current number, telling me that it's the last in the range. And then this is just to get the separators in there. And then it resets the variables once we've printed a range. And if none of these are true up here, then it says, okay, it's just a regular number, and then it prints it out depending on if it's the beginning or the end of the array. And then it returns answers. And if I run it, we've got the expected.
Very nice. Very nice. So that's, I think, probably a bet. I mean, because you didn't have any nested for loops, right? So this is just one big for loop. So that's probably the better solution, because if you can avoid the nested for loops, that's the best thing, the best solution you can come up with. Any questions about this one?
And that was more confusing than the other one they did.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is. It is. But the yeah.
How is
so
it the
nested-
better one?
I'm sorry?
How is it the better one if you agree that it's more confusing?
It is more confusing. I agree. But what makes it better is its efficiency. So when this runs, right? So we have this for loop here. It's only going to run for each element in the array. It's only going to run one time. Okay.
But
So
if, else, if, else, else.
right. That's just, all of these aren't going to run, right? It's only going to, like, the else's are only going to run if this condition is false. Does that make sense? So this is going to check these, but not all of this code will run.
Also, more code doesn't mean worse performance.
Right.
The same way less code doesn't guarantee better performance.
So the last one just kept repeating itself and going back and checking each individual number,
Right.
correct?
Yeah. So just to sort of ease into the big O notation idea, if we have 3 elements in our list or array. This will run once for each element, right? So it's going to check the first one. This code will run for the first one. It's going to check the second one. This code runs for the second one and the third one. And so that's a big O of constant time, which means it's going to run once for every element in the array. If you have a for loop within a for loop, it's going to run however many elements you have, it's going to run that many elements squared. Okay, so if you have 3 elements, it's going to run 9 times, right? Because for every element, the outer for loop runs and the inner for loop runs. Okay, so it's going to be n, or the number of elements, times itself. Whereas if you only have a single for loop, it's only going to run once for each element. Okay, I know this is probably, I've probably lost most of you, and because this is kind of confusing, but I mean, not kind of, it's a lot of confusing. But we're going to talk more about big O notation as we go through this, but basically you nesting for loops, what you should probably take home from this at this point is nested for loops bad, right? You want to try to avoid them if you can. And again, sometimes it's the only way to solve a problem. But if you can solve a problem without having a for loop within a for loop, it's better. Okay, because it has to run fewer times. Okay, anybody have questions about that? Do you not have questions because you have no idea what I'm talking about, or do you not have questions because it makes sense?
First one.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to rewatch this and listen to this.
Yeah. And I have
no idea what's happening.
Yeah, we're gonna when I have time, I'm gonna do like a lecture on big O. Okay, because I don't want to, we're right in the middle of like a deep OOP is kind of complex in itself, so I don't want to throw too much at you at once. But I just sort of want to ease you into this idea of big O. Okay, so if it doesn't make sense at this point, you're normal, right? It's a very complex and confusing topic. So we'll come back. Was that Jesse?
I'm just saying we have to go back and like redo the algo app or something, and
that's not a bad idea.
Re-educate myself.
Yeah. All right, let me stop